Okay, I think we can get going. Just for everybody's information, we are doing this session with simultaneous interpretation into French. So if you would like to hear the French version of the presentation and see those slides, there is a button at the bottom of your Zoom client that gives you the option of switching over to the French interpretation. Also, as you probably heard when you joined the call, we are going to be recording this session and we'll make it available after the fact so that people can who aren't able to attend today can watch it that way after the fact. So I want to start by just acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the unceded ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. I know that all of us come from different parts of Canada, and as is somewhat of our tradition here, I encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which you reside, work, and play, and the peoples who have been the custodians of those lands for a great many years. Also want to thank everybody very much for taking your time to come and be with us today. A group of people have been working on this for quite some time, and I think many people here will have also been involved in the process of working through drafts of some of these documents over quite a long period of time as well. And this is a good step forward in terms of finally having these documents available in a home that they shouldn't move from. So one of the things that we've been working hard to do is to try to make sure that when we publish these documents, they'll be in a permanent place. So we're just going to briefly walk through what we're going to do, give you some background around the development process for these documents, talk about how they'll be implemented, give you a brief overview of the documents. We're not going to walk through every little detail, but give you sort of the highlight movie trailer version of these documents so that you can then go and read them at your leisure. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's coming next, because this is only the first step in terms of policies, standards, guidelines, and procedures that we're working on, and a bit of a reminder of where to go from here. So to start off, why we're here today, it's really to give you an overview of how the documents that are being published today were created, where you're going to be able to find them, and for that matter, where future documents will be published as they become complete drafts and go through their process. This won't be where you'll find things that haven't been yet approved. These are the approved document publishing locations. The reason we're doing this is any cybersecurity program really needs to include awareness of the standards and policies that have been created as part of it, how to find them, and what's in them in order for it to be effective. So we really want to create a common set of expectations for everybody. And these policies, while they are things that those working more intimately with Alliance Federation systems, supporting the users on those systems, supporting the processes behind national services, are going to be, integrating into their day-to-day. It's going to be things that you see more commonly. They do apply to everybody, and one of the things to keep in mind is users, researchers who are using the services may need to show their funders and may need to show their collaborators what the policies are around the systems that they're using. So they really do apply to everybody, but it will affect you in subtle ways. These first set aren't too dramatic, but it's things that you should be aware of and understand what's in them. And then we also noted, and it's been discussed in the Slack, that there hasn't been a staff-to-staff in quite some time. So it's a good maybe kick back into that process where we can all talk together. Want to talk briefly, and I forgot to mention at the beginning as well, we'll save some time for questions at the end. So once we get to the end, we'll hold questions until the end, just to make sure that we get through all the documents and don't get stuck talking a lot about one, because there may be some questions, and there'll be opportunities to discuss more as time goes on. So this diagram is a way to look at how our document framework is structured. And there's different ways that this can be done. And we've followed this approach where we have policies that are trying to answer the question why something needs to be done. That keeps them at a fairly high level. It really talks about the importance behind things, some of the roles and responsibilities related to them, but it's not going to get into the details of how you actually do something or what needs to be done in specific. That's where we get down into the standards, directives, and frameworks, those tell you what needs to be done. So policies will say why, standards will say what. And then if we want to provide detail in terms of an actual step-by-step kind of how, that'll be down in the procedural level. And occasionally all of these documents may reference other guidelines and resources, online reference material from well-known bodies such as the NIST and other framework bodies like that. So we reference the Government of Canada. They have a lot of links, and you'll see some of those in the policies. We also have leaned heavily on bodies such as NIST, as do most people who are working in the policy and governance space. The next step that I think it's important for everybody to understand is what these documents have gone through in terms of their approval and consultation phases. When we talk about a policy, those are being approved currently via the CSAC, the Cybersecurity Advisory Council, to which the National Security Council reports. And that's sort of the final step. When we go from the top up, though, the rest is the bottom up, sorry, the rest is fairly similar between the two approaches. We have a working group that will create an initial draft. It's usually the group that's the most intimately familiar with the material that that document is going to contain. And that can take quite a bit of time, 8 to 12 weeks to get that draft done, depending on what information they need to collect. The next step is to send that out to a lot of different people within the community to get their feedback on it. And we've been doing that within the NSC, within national host sites, bodies such as the TLC, the EMC. We go through CSAC and get their opinions on it as well, whether they're approving it or not, even if it's a standard. And we then bring all that information back and work through adjusting that draft with the information that we've received from all kinds of subject matter experts across the Federation. Then we try to finalize it and hopefully get it through to an approval stage, which may or may not happen. Sometimes people say, no, we still you need to go back to the drawing board and work on it a little bit more. And some of these policies have gone through several of these cycles. So it's not a trivial process to go from a draft through to an approved document. And all the documents you'll be seeing today have gone through this process in their respective sense, if it's a policy or a standard. The other thing that we're doing as we go through all this is any significant changes to the intent are going to be tracked in a change log, and those will be published alongside the document on the website. And we're also maintaining feedback logs. So if people do give us feedback about one of the documents, we log it all and what has been done as a result of that feedback. Sometimes it's changes to the document, sometimes it's the addition of a new document, such as a guideline, and sometimes it's just going back and explaining the intent and seeing if we can get more clarification. So it can be all sorts of things depending on what that feedback was. The next step, and really where we are now, is implementing these policies and standards. And in short, you can start today. You can have a look at the documents right now and see what they say and start integrating this into your day-to-day. But some of them are going to note next to them that there is a bit of a delay or a timeline before there's an expectation of having them implemented. So things like, and we'll talk about it when we get there, the vulnerability management standard, there's a lot to that. There's expectations in the document about patching systems, and everybody should understand right away that you can't necessarily expect people to flip a switch and immediately be able to do that the day after they've first seen that document. So there's no expectation for that, and there's a built-in delay to ramp into the implementation phase of some of the documents, and that's highlighted next to each one if that exists or not. There's also a expectation or an assumption that as we move forward, these policies and standards will be applied across all national services. And so they've been written taking that into account. You have to start with some baseline understanding. So the understanding in this case is that the national services will follow these policies and standards, and subsequent other documents that we're still working on and other groups are still working on are going to make that same assumption. But we all understand that it's going to take time to implement, and some are going to not proceed right away. Others can proceed right away. So understanding a data classification, for example, once you understand that, you can start classifying your data today. It doesn't mean that all existing data that's stored everywhere is going to be able to be classified back in historical sense by tomorrow, because that would be unrealistic. So at this point, that's sort of the background. That's how we've gotten to where we are today. And it's the information that sort of is the basis. What I want to do now is pass it over to Dixon, who's going to walk you through a few of the documents that you'll see on the website and give you sort of the highlights of what those are.
Thank you, Scott. Hey there. I'm going to give you a rough through of some documents. The first document is the Glossary of Terms. Actually, it defines the definition of the terms that we are going to use in various policy standards, and it gives us the source of truth for definitions. And when we develop more policies and standards, the glossary of terms will change frequently. And if you read through the policy and you don't know what's the meaning of some of the security terms, and you can go to the glossary of terms and to read through it. And the definition is important because it may not be similar with what you expect or in your normal life. So it's important to read the glossary of terms to know that beforehand. Yeah, I think that's it for this document. Can you please go to the next slide? Okay, so the next slide is data classification policy. I'm going to give you an overview of two documents related to data handling. The objective of these two documents is to determine the security controls required to protect data according to its sensitivity, value, and criticality. The first document I would like to talk about is data classification policy. To determine what security controls are required to protect data, the first thing we need to know is the sensitivity and the importance of the data. Data classification policy has defined 4 levels of data classification based on relative importance or sensitivity of data. The 4 levels are low risk, moderate risk, high risk, and very high risk information. Examples are given for each classification in the document, but they are not exhaustive. Data owners are responsible to classify their data sets according to the policy. They can classify data to a higher risk level, but not to a lower risk. Data classification helps us to define the level of security controls required to handle and protect different classes of data. As data are classified by data owners, they have to tell data custodians the classification so that the data custodians know how to handle their data. Next slide, please. So in previous slide, we talked about classifying data according to the data classification policy. In the data handling standard, we are going to talk about how we should handle the data according to its classification. The document covers the security measures required in various areas, such as data at rest, data in transit, data disposal, and etc. The document has listed out detailed requirements in some sections. For example, the security measures required for data at rest and data in transit are more detailed. In other sections, the documents may include placeholder information to other policy and standards which are not developed yet. In these sections, we will update the link to other documents when they become available, and these documents will change accordingly. Regarding to the compliance requirements of these two documents, both of them are approved and enforced at this moment. Data owners should start to classify their data according to the data classification policy. For the data handling standard, there is a 1-year transition period, meaning that the data handling standard are required to be compiled by the end of next year. So we have walked through the 2 documents about data handling. The next policy I would like to introduce is Cybersecurity Risk Management Policy. We all know that there are a lot of cybersecurity threats and attacks happening around the globe. And the Alliance Federation is also facing the threats of being attacked. We want to strengthen our cyber defenses to protect our data and information assets. But where are the most urgent areas that we should work on first? So we need a systematic way to identify the cybersecurity risk we are facing. This policy provides a standardized way to identify cybersecurity risk associated in the services and information assets of the Alliance Federation. In an upcoming risk assessment exercise, we will identify the cybersecurity risk we are facing, measure the risk level by estimating how likely a risk will be materialized, and what's the level of impact to the Federation if it's happened. The risk assessment result will be recorded in a centralized risk register so that we have a holistic view of cybersecurity risk in the Federation. We will be able to find out the cybersecurity risk with the highest risk level so that we can prioritize our resources to mitigate those risks. The ultimate objective of this policy is to improve our overall cybersecurity posture by identifying the cybersecurity risks we are facing and prioritizing our risk mitigating activities. We have done a pilot risk assessment exercise in the last quarter, and the result was good. We are now starting a risk assessment project, which will identify and measure the cybersecurity risk in our services and our information assets across the Federation. The National Security Council will contact the subject matter experts to kick off the process. So you don't have to start to do the risk assessment right away. We will contact you when it's your turn. At this moment, you can go to the website and read through the cybersecurity risk management policy and also the risk assessment procedure to learn what to be expected in the upcoming exercise. So this concludes the overview of these 3 documents. And I would like to hand over to Ben to introduce the vulnerability management policy.
Awesome. Thank you, Dixon. And so the vulnerability management standard, hopefully this isn't the first time you're hearing about the standard. This document was led by the Vulnerability Management Working Group, which is led by Sean Whittington Paul. You notice the first line that says their status approved, and this sort of articulates to what Scott was saying before, in force a year transition period. The Vulnerability Management Working Group is going through a procurement right now to sort of expand on our capabilities in terms of vulnerability management. And with this increased capabilities, likely our visibilities into sort of the nooks and crannies of our environment will become a lot more visible. And so will the amount of identified vulnerabilities, and so will the amount of identified work. And so what this document does here is we try to articulate sort of what the expectations of that life cycle will look like. I guess for context, for those that are not sure what a vulnerability management standard is, just reading from the first paragraph, compromise due to software or configuration vulnerabilities that threaten the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of a Digital Research Alliance of Canada Federation ecosystem or connected device. And so it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea there is we want to set and make it very clear sort of what the expectations are around the life cycle in terms of in scanning, detecting results, what they're initially and how they're initially handled, what the expectation and how they flow into sort of a change advisory or in terms of remediation, and how they're ultimately reported. And alluding back to what Dixon mentioned before in terms of risk management, a lot of these things will be captured likely in our risk registry that we sort of work our way through. And so that's a way to sort of report back on it as well. And so we're hoping this document really sort of spells out what the expectations from the various parties are. A lot of people have contributed to this document, and we're very appreciative. And so this, as we learn more, this will further develop as well. And so next slide, please. So policies and standards currently in the pipeline. And so as Scott had alluded to earlier, the policy standards and procedures that you see here are just the start. And so the next 3 that are in the pipeline that we'll hopefully bring out to the community relatively shortly is the cybersecurity policy, which is sort of our overarching policy that ties all the pieces together and spells off accountability, our system logging and security monitoring standard. And this is to support some of the work from some of the National Security Council working groups led by Jonathan Furlud. And by Dixon in terms of asset management. And we're trying to articulate the information and the data we need to sort of provide better visibility for both of those initiatives. And interestingly enough, too, what's not mentioned here as well is in the policy and governance NIST cybersecurity framework roadmap, we have 21 policies and standards identified. And so this is sort of just the kind of the tip of the iceberg, as Scott alluded to earlier, as well as a further 22 procedures, guidelines, and other documents. And so we sort of like to sort of signal and hopefully provide our audience the opportunity to sort of comment, not necessarily on what's provided here, but on the work to come as we sort of look for and seek feedback from the ecosystem as we develop out those additional procedures, guidelines, and other documents. And so we definitely appreciate your help there. And so next slide, please. And so we'll leave it kind of at here, as well as so if you're looking for the documents, here's the link for it. And so if you have a phone and it supports a QR code, you can take a picture, and that might save you from typing in a few characters here. And the idea is, as Scott sort of alluded to earlier, is we're hoping to make both the staff and the users familiar with these documents as we further develop and flesh them out. And we suggest that if you have the opportunity to talk to users or other folks that weren't able to make it to the presentation today, is to just encourage them to have a look over. And we're always collecting feedback. And so if you have any questions or concerns about the documents you see in front of us, we definitely encourage you to reach out by that email address that's there, as well as we'll definitely be looking for opportunities from the community more largely to help contribute to some of these other documents that we've alluded to, and there's a bunch more to come. And so, yeah, next slide, please. Unless that is the last
that's
slide.
it. Sorry, I was having trouble
better.
getting to my mute button.
I'll pass
That's
it
the
back
last
over to
slide.
Scott. I'll pass it back over to Scott, and he'll sort of wrap this up for us.
So yeah, at this point, we can definitely take any questions people might have. To sort of double down on a couple of points. The web address that you see there should remain sort of as a permalink. That's our goal, that these links and the links to the documents themselves that you see on that page won't change. So feel free to bookmark them. There are some links between documents themselves that use those same ones. Also, that email address is going to be sort of our ongoing feedback email, where we'll take any sort of questions or feedback related to the policies and standards. So that's a good one to keep in mind as well. We've tried to set up these things as much as possible so that they will last in some sense of perpetuity.